Hear me.
Вот скажи мне, американец, в чем сила?
А вы что, собираетесь на ней жениться?
Да.
Ух, красота-то какая, лепота.
Таможня дает добро.
И вообще не называй меня, пожалуйста, Вероникой. Кто я? Вот кто я?
Отныне в русской земле единый быть.
Don't torture me, I can't live without him.
Hi, my name's Ali, and this is the Russophiles Unite podcast, where we watch Russian films and films with a Russian connection. As always, I am joined by a guest, and once more, I am joined by Lynn.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Sorry, talking over you there at the end.
That is quite alright.
Can I say how nice it is to see you in person after very many months of not being able to see you in person?
It is very pleasant to see you too, Lynn. Yes, it's yeah, it feels so long.
It does feel so long. So, after all the responsible social distancing.
Yeah, we're now throwing caution to the wind.
Yeah. By this huge gathering of two people.
Yeah. Editorial notes. Lynn and I recorded this episode back in August when UK coronavirus case numbers were considerably lower and when social distancing measures had been relaxed as well. Thought it was important to mention that.
So, yes. Anyway, what are we here to watch on this auspicious 50th episode?
50th episode. We are... Yes, before we say what we're going to watch, for new folks, I feel like they should find out who you are. So, Lynn, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Lynn, hello, and I sometimes come over and watch Russian films with Ali. I've known Ali for quite a long time.
Like over half our lives at this point.
Yeah, I think, maybe 2/3. Anyway, it's been a while.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes I do that. I also co-host Gentlemen Don't Get Caught with Ali, get a plug in there, a podcast that's broadly about the works of R.E.M., the band.
Yes.
People know what R.E.M. is, right?
I think so. I think they're pretty famous.
Yeah, unless we're getting like a lot of very young people that are like, don't remember.
Yeah.
Remember the 90s.
Yes, yeah. It's getting on for like 10 years since they broke up as well, which is like...
Which makes me feel odd because I remember that pretty vividly.
Yeah, insane. But yes, so it's the 50th episode, so I thought we would toast to 50 episodes.
Indeed. Before we toast, can I point out to all the listeners that it's 10:10 in the morning?
It's fine. Maybe it's an appropriate drinking time where you're listening, dear listener.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Also, I drove here, but I don't have to drive for like another 8 hours or so.
Oh, you have maybe hinted towards what we're watching. So what we're drinking is some Bielaya Berezka vodka, which is white birch vodka, and it contains birch juice because they thought, vodka, it's not Russian enough. How can we make it more Russian? Let's put some birch juice in it.
I associate birch... Is it like birch beer with sort of Pennsylvania?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's horrible.
I quite like it. I mean, I like root beer, but I'm also married, as you know, previous listeners will know, to a Pennsylvanian. So I've acquired some tastes over the years.
Yeah. I'd rather eat Scrapple than drink birch beer.
Scrapple is good.
Anyway, on that note, these are very nice glasses.
Yes,
I like them.
Yeah, they're very pretty. This is quite old vodka. This was a bottle that is. It's not like it matures or goes off, so we're probably fine. But
it doesn't smell of anything, so that's meant to be a good
alcohol.
sign.
Yeah. Yes, so this was a present from some students.
Right, how do we do this?
Well, this is the thing. What you don't do is you don't say na zdrowie because not actually a Russian toast.
Right.
What you normally do is a big long toast, but it's to something.
Okay.
And now I'm trying to decide what I can actually do, and I might have to edit around this. Given that we're watching War and Peace,
Right.
I think maybe we should toast to Leo Tolstoy.
Sure. I'm up for that.
Yeah. Now I have to remember how to decline his name properly. I think it's.
I mean, I won't be able to tell. So,
Yeah.
although some of your listeners probably
They
can.
probably will, yeah. So, right. So I think it would be.
Do we shot this or sip it?
Really, you should shot it. And and you're not meant to put it down on the table before you finish it.
Okay,
So
before you finished it.
Yes.
Okay. I was worried that you were going to say after you finish it, you just have to carry it around. It's like you think you can't put it down till sunset or something.
No, as far as I know, that's fine. But yeah, I was told by. So for a little while, it was about 6 months. I lived with a Russian family in their spare room, essentially, and the dad was like taught me how to like drink vodka properly. And one of the things was like, I mean, maybe this isn't a thing, and he was just BSing because it's like, oh yeah, this is a gullible foreigner who will believe anything. But yeah, he told me that you weren't supposed to put a shot glass back on the table until it was empty.
Okay,
So
I can see that.
Yeah, but you also have lots of snacks, which we don't have.
I've got coffee,
yes,
which is here to wash it down, I guess.
Yeah.
I might really like it. Maybe I'll become a vodka drinker.
maybe.
I don't think I have drank vodka that wasn't in a cocktail, or maybe even in a cocktail since
This
university.
is a
so
new experience. Then.
at least 15 years.
Yeah, and you probably haven't had it with birch juice in it. Not that.
No.
Yeah, not that you'll probably be able to. Either of us will be able to taste it, but yes. So yes, to Tolstoy. So za Lva Tolstova, I think.
By Ackley.
By Italy.
That was alright.
Yeah, I'm not sure I tasted the birch juice.
I mean, it didn't taste. Is this technically empty because there's a tiny little bit of vodka?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it didn't taste entirely like flavourless, so I guess there's a little bit of birch there.
Yeah.
It was pretty good.
Yeah, my tongue's now on fire and I have to use it to talk.
Yeah. Thanks. Aw.
Cheers.
Celebratory. Cheers.
Yes, 50 episodes. It's yeah. I thought definitely wanted to have you on this one, seeing as you've been on many episodes,
Thank you.
including the very first one.
That's definitely more episodes than Serial. So take that, Serial.
Yeah. I don't even know what Serial is.
It's a very acclaimed podcast.
Oh, okay. I've totally missed it then.
That's all right. I would definitely recommend the first series because they're all like about different crimes or whatever.
Okay,
But
yeah.
I think are there 3 now, possibly. But the first series is really interesting.
I was
gradually
hearing it
it
as
goes
in
downhill.
cereal with a C.
Oh, there's probably
There
there's got to
probably
be a
is.
podcast with Serial.
Almost certainly,
Surely.
yeah.
But yeah, well, it's a place to be here. So what
Yes.
are we watching today?
As we've mentioned, we're watching War and Peace. Okay, so this isn't the first time we've watched a War and Peace on this show. So this is a different one. Previously, we watched the Hollywood one from the 50s. So if you haven't heard that one already, go back and listen to it. It is a great episode. But yeah, this is the Soviet version from 1966, an auspicious year for English people.
Yep.
Because it was the one time we won the World Cup. Yes, and it was directed by Sergei Bondarchuk. And we've actually watched 2 of his son's films. So I feel kind of bad because Sergei Bondarchuk is, from what I've heard, I haven't seen any of his films, a much more renowned quality director than his son, who kind of makes, popcorn movies.
That's the way around, I guess. You want to watch the not so good ones first, because otherwise they're not ruined. Then they're not ruined by the better ones.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, neither Stalingrad nor Attraction got like massively high reviews from us, but yeah. So this is like I think it's 422 minutes, which
It's quite a lot of minutes.
it's
That's a
quite
little
lot of
over
minutes.
7 hours.
Yeah. So we're probably gonna get on with this pretty soon. So it's going to be a little bit of a different format this time, in that we're going to, after each like disc, we're watching it on DVD. We're going to stop and do a short summary of what we've seen, and then, you know, a quick what did you think of it, and then we're going to carry on, and then we're going to do the big, I was going to say analysis. I'm giving myself too much credit. But yeah, the big summing up at the end. But before we start, do you know very much about War and Peace at all?
I know it's based on a book.
Good. Hope you knew that.
By Leo Tolstoy. That's about the Napoleonic Wars.
It is, yes.
So that would be in the early 1800s.
It is, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I know it's epic.
Yeah, it's an epically long book. It's kind of like, if you want an edition that you don't need like a magnifying glass to read, it's kind of getting towards 1,500 pages. But yeah, I've read it. I read it when I was probably about like 21, 22. And I initially, being a cheapskate, bought like a one edition copy. It was about 900 pages. And it was literally like, okay, this is not going to work. It was just tiny print. So yeah, it's been a long time since I've read it. It sounds awful, but it was only like coming across subsequent adaptations that I really got a handle on the plot.
Do you know how closely this adheres to the book? I mean, we can discuss this, I guess, later.
I think pretty closely, just because it is as long as it is. The big issue that we had with the Hollywood adaptation from the 50s, even though it is 3 hours, so it's, you know, it's in the epic film bracket, is that it's just, they're trying to cram too much in and they end up rushing stuff. So I think it's quite faithful just from the fact that it's long enough to do that. I mean, I'm sure they'll cut stuff out because it's a huge book, but I think a lot less ends up on the cutting room floor. One thing I would imagine is hard to incorporate is that, like, every so often you would get a philosophical bit where Tolstoy stops advancing the plot and kind of goes into like an essay about his theories of history. Like, a big thing for him was that he really had no time for the great man of history theory. He was very much like, it's kind of trends and forces and individuals are kind of have their part to play, but it's hard to explain. It's kind of like a collective thing rather than, you know, great individuals. So yeah, so there's those kind of essay elements that I don't know how you'd incorporate it. A BBC radio adaptation from, it's getting on for 10 years ago, did a surprisingly good job, as far as I could see, like giving some of those ideas to characters in dialogue, which sounds super clunky, but the way that they framed it worked quite well. I probably banged on about the BBC radio adaptation on the previous episode.
I remember being on and then not really listening to it. But
it was quite an event, because it was like, I seem to remember when they actually broadcast it, they just, like, it just took over Radio 4 for, like, the entire day.
Oh, okay.
It was cool. Like, I think it's 10 hours, so it's even longer than this. But it's so good. Also, it has the late lamented John Hurt as a... Can you have an important minor character? It sounds like an oxymoron. But yeah, he's...
I guess I was thinking of those as like recurring characters in a sort of TV show.
Yeah.
Where they're people that show up frequently, but they aren't part of like the main core cast.
Yeah. Yes. So he's an important supporting character, and he's frickin' awesome. So yes, R.I.P. John Hurt.
Yeah. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. So yes. So we should probably get on with the thing.
That sounds good. I only skim-read the Wikipedia article before coming here.
Yeah, so what did you
I
pick
only
up?
remember 2 facts.
Okay.
3 facts. 1, it won...
It's almost like Spanish Inquisition facts here.
It won Best Foreign Film at the Oscars and the Golden Globes.
That is, yeah, I didn't know about the Golden Globe. Yeah, I didn't know it won.
There
those.
were roughly 10,000 extras, which is quite a lot of extras.
Yes. Yes, you can't just CGI a bunch of soldiers in 1966.
And the last one, because it was a dog fact, so obviously that was the one that I was going to remember.
Oh yeah.
Which apparently there's a hunting scene that features borzoi dogs.
Right, yes.
And at the time in the Soviet Union, they were not a common breed of dog. So they managed to round some up from various different people.
Oh, okay.
But none of them had hunted before, so they couldn't get them to chase anything. So apparently they had to get some other dogs in to do the hunting, and then they just filmed the borzois at the very last moment of the bit.
That is a great... I'm not sure that's a dog fact so much as a dog anecdote.
A dog anecdote.
Awesome.
So,
Yes,
the
that's very
borzois
cool.
are putting in less work in real life than it appears from the film.
Nice. Cool. Well, on that spectacular factoid/anecdote, we should probably launch into this thing.
Yes, absolutely.
So, what do we say, Lynn?
Piakali, that's what we say.
It is. Because
that's what Yuri Gagarin said when he was rocketing off into space.
Yes. So yeah, I think it's suitably appropriate for launching on such an epic
Absolutely.
film. So yeah. All right. So 3, 2, 1.
Piakali!
And we're back. Lynn and I have just watched the first part of War and Peace. We're about 2 hours in at this point.
Yep.
Slim 2 hours. So, we're just going to give you a quick update on what's happened so far. Or Lynn's going to try. So, what I thought we might do, rather than going straight into the plot, was asking, who have we met so far?
I have no idea. That's not quite true. I'm really struggling to tell who...
Who is who?
Yeah, who is who and what's their deal.
Who would you say is the main guy?
See, yeah, it just doesn't feel like there is a main guy, really.
At this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a few, people that have recurred.
Okay.
So there's the guy that just got shot at the end.
Okay, so...
Is he Prince something or a Prince?
He is, yes.
Prince somebody.
He's Prince Andrei
And,
Bolkonsky.
I nearly said, Alexei, but Andrei. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was close-ish.
Yes.
It says him. There's the guy that was in the red jacket at the start with the glasses that's meant to be a lot younger than he looks.
Yes, so that is Pierre.
Right.
Pierre
okay.
Bezukhov. Yep.
Okay, I remember him. I was going to say his mate, but is his mate the prince?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
same guy.
So Andre and Pierre are best buds.
See, if you had to say who was the main characters so far, I would say that those two are the main characters.
Yes, and you would be right.
Okay, cool. Other recurring characters, there's the old general.
Yes. You could be talking about several people here.
The guy that just appears to be falling asleep and losing it a bit.
That is Kutuzov, and it's worth mentioning that he's an actual historical figure.
Okay.
As is obviously Napoleon.
Yep.
And we've also met another general called Bagration, and he's also historical. But yeah, Andre and Pierre are fictional characters.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I was going to say there's the old count that died. Who
Yes.
seemed important, but was hardly obviously in it.
Yes, that is Pierre's dad. And
Okay, I knew they were related somehow, but I couldn't quite figure out exactly.
But Pierre is that character's illegitimate son, so there is a big question mark over when he's going to inherit, which he ultimately does.
Okay, yeah, I got something that they were related somehow, and it wasn't clear whether he was going to inherit. But that was the key bit that I'd missed.
Yes. So Pierre has inherited that Count Guy's money, and so he is now loaded.
And then there seems to be like 3 notable female characters so far. So there's the old lady that gave the prince the necklace, the icon.
Yes. So
she's not old, but like old relative to the girl with the doll that's like 14.
Yes, yeah. So that is Maria, who is Prince Andrei's sister.
Okay, yeah, I assumed they were related somehow.
Yes.
So there's her, there's the young lass.
Yeah, the girl with the doll.
The girl with the doll.
Yes. That is Natasha Rostova.
Okay, she keeps showing up. And the last one is the one that hasn't really said anything, just we keep flashing back to parties. And people are like, she's very pretty.
Yes, so that is Hélène. And she is just about to be married to Pierre.
Okay.
So I'm getting the impression that, like, you're finding the storytelling style a little...
Yeah, I'm finding it very hard to, like, work out really what's... like, the very, very broad strokes you can kind of get.
Yeah.
But, like, any real details, I'm just really struggling to...
Okay, so those broad strokes that we haven't already mentioned then are...
It's just the kind of overall, like, the overarching setting of...
Yeah.
The Napoleonic Wars, and Napoleon has invaded Austria, and that the Austrians have allied with the Russians to try and repel him before he gets into Russia.
Yeah. How's that going by the end of part 1?
So Napoleon seems to be doing all right by the end of part 1. So the Russians are not doing great. So it's not really a victory, but a minor not defeat where they managed to hold off Napoleon, because some of the Russian/Austrian army has been cut off by the French, but then the rest of the Russian army manages to hold off Napoleon enough for that army to largely retreat without taking significant losses. And then there's the Battle of Austerlitz, apologies for my German pronunciation, which ends this
disc.
You're going to say half. It's not half.
No, it's part 1. Yes, it's not even the end of the disc.
this first part of the film, where Napoleon seems to defeat the combined Austria-Russian armies. So defense of Eastern Europe is not going. I guess Austria is Central Europe. Going so well so far.
Yes.
But yeah, a lot of the details are lost to me. But we've had some fun interludes.
Oh, yes. Highlights?
So the marching soldiers, they're marching through Austria, start singing, which is fine. But then the guy in front appears to be employed to sort of do jaunty dances. While the rest of the soldiers are marching. Yeah. Which was just unexpected.
Yeah. Another favourite thing so far is the, like, more junior of the 2 Russian generals, Bagration, changing hats.
Oh, that was very good. Already wearing one giant hat, and then has like an aide who just comes to him with a different hat, which is also giant and ridiculous.
Well, the first hat is this kind of like fluffy cap thing. It's got a peak, and then he switches it over to that more giant
It's a Bicorn hat, I guess, isn't it?
Yes, I guess it would be a Bicorn hat. Yeah, it's the kind of the thing that if you think Napoleon or the Duke of Wellington, it's that giant, which looks like...
era of military hats, I guess.
Yeah, it kind of looks like you've kind of like cut a pear in half and like stuck the top half on.
It's unclear so far whether the guy that gives him the other hat is just like, well, that's his job, whether he's just like a hat guy. Corporal hat guy.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to more of that.
Yes.
It's an incredibly shot film so far. In addition to obviously the thousands of extras, just all the aerial shots that I can't imagine in the 60s.
Yeah, like...
I mean, even in Hollywood, I can't imagine people are doing them that often.
Yeah.
And they're amazing.
Yeah, it definitely lives up to that phrase of like throwing just all the money at the screen.
It's stunning to look at. Yeah, I don't associate older movies necessarily with such a kind of kinetic camera. Like, there's always movement all the time. There's so many...
Yeah. Even in the talkie shots, there's a lot of movement too.
There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of I assume this was intentional, sort of from some person's point of view shots.
Yes, when the count is
that's
dying.
the most notable bit. Yeah, with the sort of dying count, and you get sort of weird blurring and like ghosting effects and things. It's just
Yeah, and then there's one, like, it's awful but also kind of hilarious point of view shot.
it just didn't seem like very much in keeping with the tone of the film.
No,
the rest of the film,
it suddenly went all carry on.
It did go very carry on.
So if you've not watched the film along with us so far, if you have, you'll know exactly which shot we're talking about. But the shot we're talking about is essentially Pierre is having a conversation with Hélène, who's his sort of like intended, but he has very kind of mixed feelings about. But he has established that, that he's attracted to her, and we just see this point of view shot where he just stares at her cleavage.
Yeah, where the camera just pans
down.
And you're like, this is too much time. It's like the whole thing is set in an episode, either to Carry On or it's set into an episode of Peep Show. Where everything's just first-person perspectives.
It's just like, okay, that's what we... But yeah, it just feels so, like... out of keeping with the very like grand style of the rest of it.
My assumption about part 2 is there's going to be a time jump. I mean, I realise that the whole thing is set over a period of I'm guessing a decade or so, but I don't know.
So what was the last thing that's happened, which is a very
so that was good. So the prince gets wounded on the battlefield, and then is lying on the ground, being obviously in pain, and like looks up and sees the sky and has an epiphany about
the universe,
about life and how kind of human beings are just deceit and complication and that kind of thing, and the only true thing is the beauty of the sky and the expanse of it, and how he's never really noticed that before.
Yeah, but then he has doubts and is like, well, is this even real?
End of part 1.
Well, and then Napoleon shows up.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And he's like, voila, it is a noble death. Well,
in terms of Monty Python movie.
Yes, I should say he says it in French, and then there's like a Russian overdub, and then we've got the subtitles on top of it.
Yeah, they seem reluctant to subtitle anything that's not in Russian.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like in the initial scenes, especially, we have a lot of conversations that are between Russians, but they're nobles, so they're chatting away in French because that's what you did. So, but the way that they've done it on the film is that for some of it, they'll say it in French, and then you'll get like a Russian overdub of what they said immediately afterwards, and then of course we're getting the subtitles as well. And then sometimes you have, like, especially when... Oh, that's another person who we need to introduce, sort of. It's Prince Andrei's wife. You've got bits where she would say things to her husband in French, and then he would respond in Russian, and we'd only get, like, the response that was in Russian, subtitled. So you kind of, like, had to work out, sort of, from context what she had said, but she was switching between French and Russian, and they weren't doing overdubs. And the other thing that was weird is that you've got lots of narration as well. A fair bit of narration.
Okay. I'm not sure I've clocked that, really.
Okay. Yeah, no, I felt like it was more like you have narrators talking, and then there's people talking in the background in some scenes. And we've had a bit of it in some of the battles. But yes, it's kind of bewildering, but it's
certainly bewildering, but I'm kind of enjoying it. I mean, that was 2 hours, and without thinking about how much more we've got to go, like that. I've watched films that are 2 hours long and that felt a lot longer than this has so far, so it definitely... It's not... It may be long, but it's not just full of
It's
nothing.
Not dragging.
Yeah, it's not dragging particularly. Okay. It's cool. Quite... There's plenty going on.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we should get to the next part.
Yeah, I'm excited about the next part.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear it. All right.
Right. Cool. Thanks very much.
And we're back again. Lynn and I have watched Part 2, although, programming note here.
Yeah. This was very confusing. We watched Disc 2, Film
Yes.
2, Part 2, even though it seemed to be that Part 1 started on Disc 1 in Film 1.
Yes, it's very confusing, and we
Yes.
are very confused. So we apologise if we're also confusing you.
There was about 45
dear
minutes
listener.
of film
Yeah,
after our last interval.
yes, that was still on the... Still Film 1, but was already into Part 2.
Confusing.
And something just fell off somewhere, and I have no idea what that was. But I'm hoping it's going to be okay.
It's probably fine.
It's just our resident ghosts. But yes, so we're a little bit confused, and we apologise for any confusion we have caused. But yeah, it's been a little while. It's been 2 more hours worth of film in total?
Yeah, slightly more than that, yep.
Yeah. And where are we? Where have we been? What's happened?
Was there a peace treaty or something at the start between France and Russia?
Yes.
Napoleon visits the floating island of peace or something.
Yes, in Tilsit, which I'm not even sure I know where that is. I have a feeling it might be have been in one of the German states.
Okay,
at the time, but yeah, it may now be in Poland. I have no idea. Borders have moved a lot since, the Napoleonic times.
And then there was an hour and a half of people kind of falling in love or not falling in love and arguing with each other about whether they'd fallen in love or not.
Yes, be a bit more specific.
So, everyone's in love with, is it Natasha?
Mm-hmm. Who we met in the first part, who was very young in the first part.
Yeah, so then it jumps to 1810. Well, it jumps very briefly to 1807 for about 5 minutes.
Yes, so that's the Tilsit bit. Then it goes forward to
1810. So we're 5 years on or something from the first, most of the first part. So I guess she's 19 or something.
Ish.
18, 19, 20, somewhere around there. So she's engaged to one guy that she doesn't seem very interested in.
Yes, which is Prince Andrei.
That's right.
Who, despite being pretty severely wounded at the end of part 1, has recovered, and...
Yes. So, it's confusing, because he doesn't seem that interested in her.
Yeah.
But she's interested in him, and then, eventually, there's a ball where she's a sort of debutante, and she's like, why won't anyone dance with me?
Yes.
And then
someone dances with her.
Someone dances with her.
Namely, Prince Andrei.
Yeah, and then that all happens. And then some other things go on, and then we're near the end, and the mate of the guy that was almost killed in the duel at the end of part 1 against Pierre is at the theatre, and then she falls in love with him, apparently, and then it's super dramatic. And then Pierre shows up right at the end, and is like, well, if I was single and younger, and I'd fall in love with you too, I guess.
Yes. I do not blame you for being bewildered. There's a lot of plot.
It's kind of weird because there's a lot less, I don't know. Yeah. Is there more plot? The first part, I felt like there was more stuff going on. They kept moving to different locations.
Yes, and there was also a lot more war.
Yeah. There's a lot of peace, but it's all emotional war.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. We also had This is where between the two films has been a problem, because I think this was in the end of film 1, but in part 2 we had the duel between.
Oh yeah, have we skipped that bit?
I feel like
I think we might have done. I think I'm just so focused on what was on the disc.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. So Pierre duels this other guy for sleeping with his wife.
Called Dolokhov, yes.
And even though Pierre is very nervous and thinks Jules is stupid and is a bad shot, manages to shoot Dolokhov. Thank you.
We assume in the stomach or something.
Yeah, it looks more. Yeah, the stomach or maybe the hip or something.
Yeah, it's definitely an abdominal wound, but not one that actually kills you.
Yes. So he does survive, but it looks like he's in pain. He doesn't seem so far to be particularly bitter at Pierre about it.
No, he seems to be taken it really in his stride, being nearly mortally wounded.
But maybe that's just what it's like being
being
19th century
hothead.
Russian aristocrat hothead. Yeah.
Yeah. Just kind of like, oh yeah. Well, he nearly killed me at one point, but, no hard feelings.
It's that happened. I feel like it's really hard to summarize it. Because because the first disc I found, or the first part I found difficult to follow, but because it was quite segmented, at least you can say like, oh, they're back at home, and so this is happening, then they're in war, and this is happening, and then they're in France, and then not in France, they're in Austria, and then there's this battle, and you're like, okay, so broadly put together and then missing details. But because this is, the second part's almost entirely set just like at people's houses.
Yes.
Barring a brief hunting sequence. Yeah, it will kind of merge into one. And they just keep cutting. So there'll be like Natasha and one guy, and then it will kind of fade briefly, but they'll be in the same room in the same lighting, and it's Natasha and a different guy.
Yeah. Some of the transitions weren't super clear, and also there's some split screen going on.
There's some split screen going on. A lot of the actors look very similar to each other.
Yes, yeah. There's the guy who plays Pierre is very distinctive, and he's also the director, we should say. And
I was doing okay with Natasha, but then Sonia, her cousin or something, shows up and looks like her.
Yes, we briefly saw Sonia in part one as she was kissing Nikolai, who is Natasha's older brother. Who I think we kind of skipped him out.
But there's about three like youngish gentlemen that aren't Pierre. That all pretty much look at a glance, unless they're standing next to each other.
Yeah,
look
quite similar. They're all about the same height. They have a very similar haircut, and they're all very square-jawed and handsome.
And because they're pretty much all in the military, they're all wearing the same uniforms as well.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
Which doesn't help.
Yeah.
So right at the very end of this part, it comes up. There's a comet, and then it comes up with 1812, and we all know what happens in 1812. They burned down the White House.
They meaning
Canadians? No.
Yeah, the British forces. In the War of 1812.
That's right. Why don't they want? If it's not, I mean, it's called the War of 1812. Which war are you meant to think of when you think of 1812?
Yeah, it wasn't the most creative naming of a war.
No,
particularly as I think it started before 1812 and finished afterwards. But yeah,
rubbish. But no, of course, you've seen Napoleon starting to invade Russia,
and it is very portentous.
It's very portentous. So that's what we've got to look forward to in part 3, I guess.
Indeed. All right, so let's get back to it. Hello, dear listener. We are back once again for our penultimate section of this podcast.
We are.
How goes it, Lynn?
It's all right. It was only an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, it was quite a short section.
But
no, well, one good thing is that part 3, the disc lines up with where it ended the film at end of part 3. But this is not the end of the film of War and Peace. This is the end of film 3 of War and Peace. But yeah.
That was intense. It was pretty much the whole thing was just a battle sequence.
Yes, yeah.
Which was kind of amazing.
There was a bit of a preamble, but not very much.
No, I reckon probably an hour of that was the battle sequence.
Yeah.
And then there was like 15 minutes or so at the start of preamble. Yeah. That might be wrong, but that's how I felt.
Yes, yeah, it was just this like pretty constant onslaught.
Which means we left behind, kind of, most people that we've met.
Yeah, well, we did have at the beginning Prince Andrei's dad.
Oh, yes.
Dies.
We did, he dies.
I mean, he goes like kind of progressively sort of like dementia-y, and then he dies.
Yep.
He kind of gets confused about what's happening. He thinks that the French are way further away than they are. And then he suddenly realises, oh, like they're here.
And then we don't meet Andre again until the very end of the disc.
We briefly meet him before the battle. But what happens right before the battle who turns up that you might not expect to see.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is he like the audience surrogate by the fact that he spends the whole battle standing around looking confused?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, it's a thing that happens in the book, and it's just very random to see it on screen.
Yeah, that bit didn't really make... Is there more context in the book? Because it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. So he shows up in a top hat and a sort of linen suit.
He looks so ridiculous.
He looks so out of place. And then just kind of stands around by some cannoneers. Is that what they're called? People that fire cannons for most of it. Just chatting to people.
Yeah, but before the battle, he meets up with Andre, which I don't think happens quite this way in the book. I think it happens like a fair bit before the battle, whereas this is kind of like
so right beforehand,
pretty much like the night before, and Andre and him kind of have a heart to heart, and Andre is basically like, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, but not in a kind of like, not in a I'm scared, but just in a sort of like a stoic, like resigned, sort of depressed, but not like, not in a like I'm afraid kind of way.
Yeah, that feels accurate.
And then the battle happens.
Yeah, so lots of people die. It's hard to convey on a podcast what the battle sequence is like because it's so visual and so not really much plot or anything.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that we said as we were watching it was that it's very hard to get a sense of what's going on in a sort of tactical, overview sense.
It's about 2/3 of the way through until it seems like you see anybody do anything that feels... I don't know much about Napoleonic era warfare, but it feels like it does anything tactical rather than just like, well, just run towards them, I guess. Try and shoot, I guess.
Yeah, there's just a lot of people like marching in one direction, people marching in the other, cavalry charges this way, cavalry charges that way, huge explosions.
Yeah, it's quite disorienting.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's deliberate, that it's giving you this kind of like, to use that infamous phrase, shock and awe, like, this is terrifying and awful.
Yeah.
But yeah, later on you do get this one bit where you have, I think this is the bit you were alluding to, where some French cavalry are like charging towards this like Russian cavalry group, and then the Russian cavalry group just like peels away and reveals that there's this like huge gun battery behind them, and like the French just get like blown away. And it feels like this was deliberate.
And it's kind of unclear enough that you only really know anything about the outcome from the narration at the very end of the film.
Yes, yeah. Well, and there's sort of some argument as well. Like we see Kutuzov, who's the main general, towards the end. And there's a bit where a guy comes up to him and is basically like, oh no, we're losing. And then Kutuzov like balls him out and is like, how dare you say that to me? We're not losing. You just saw it wrong. And then, as you say, at the end, the narration sort of semi-explains.
Yeah. The narration kind of seemed to... I mean, again, don't know much about it, because so many people seem to die. It seems to kind of overstate how much of a victory this was.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like that much of a victory.
Yeah. So the way the narration explains it is that it's a Russian moral victory, which is kind of like, generally agreed to be sort of the case. Like, technically the Russians retreated, but both sides suffered, like, insanely heavy losses, and that, like, technically it's a victory for the French in the sense that they continued to advance, but it's very much like a Pyrrhic victory because they lost a lot of men and kind of momentum and morale and, like, yeah. But yeah, the battle we should I don't think we've mentioned is the Battle of Borodino, and it's like one of the most famous battles of the Napoleonic War. But yeah, it's incredibly impressive, very bewildering, and...
Yeah, we were speculating how long it took to film. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it must have been a lot.
Yeah. Like, we have some of these kind of, like, swooping shots where the camera just kind of, like, dives into the middle of the action. And then a lot of it is just, like, the scale of you just have, like, the whole widescreen filled with...
Yeah, just
either
thousands
troops
of people.
marching or cavalry charging, and, like, you have... people standing on hilltops and all this stuff happening down below them, and you just go, how the heck did you choreograph this?
So I'm interested to see how it ends. My suspicion would be that it'll be a bit more like the first film, and that it's a mix of battle and of non-battle scenes. We
Yeah.
had the second one that was just all
Talky.
Yeah. And the third one was all fighty.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether we'll bookend it with a film that's more like the
I
opening
think
one,
I think that's
find out.
a pretty solid prediction. But yeah, let's
Cool.
let's get back to it.
but onwards. Right.
Onward! Hello, once again, and we are back for the final part of the episode. Hi, Lynn, how are you doing?
I'm okay. I've had the second wind. If you've asked me out after the third part, my answer would have been knackered.
Yeah, I must admit, I was definitely flagging and feeling pretty, like, if you'll pardon the pun, shell-shocked.
Yeah.
So, what has happened in the final instalment?
Well, I was trying to think of like a Les Miserables Moscow pun, but I couldn't really get one. Because it all gets very bleak, and Pierre's walking around like he's an impoverished man in Paris, as the French are there burning down Moscow.
Yes.
Seems rude.
Yeah. I mean, it is ambiguous both from history and this version, like, who did it.
Oh, what do you mean?
Like, whether it's deliberately, like, the French burning down Moscow, or whether it's the Russians, like, burnt it down as a kind of, like, screw you guys on the way out the back door, / whether it's an accident. I think generally the consensus is that it was kind of an accident, that it's just you have a lot of drunk people, like, running around the place. And Moscow at that time was very wooden. I mean, you see lots of stone cathedrals, but most of the buildings were mostly wood, so, you know.
I can believe that there was a combination of all three of those things.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's one version that is like the Russians were just kind of like, do you know what? This is so much like to the death, but we're just going to burn our own like second city down just to spite you, Napoleon. But yeah.
So then what happens?
Well, he narrowly avoids death.
He does, yeah. And then they're captured by the French, aren't they? Him and a load of other people.
Yeah, basically arrested because...
Yeah, and then they're kind of dragged around the place.
Yeah, and then there's essentially a firing squad.
Yeah, there's a firing squad. He makes friends with a peasant with a dog.
Yep.
Then you know what? I can't really remember the next bit between that and then the French invading the rest of Russia in winter, and then...
Well, they're basically leaving Moscow, actually. They decide at a certain point, this isn't working out, and they decide to leave before the winter really sets in, which that doesn't necessarily come across from the film, but that didn't really work. Well, it doesn't come across that they're trying to get out before the winter sets in.
No.
It's just they're leaving, and the winter's, sorry guys, too late. It's really cold now.
Yeah.
So is it a bit of a blur?
Yeah, it is a bit of a blur, and then I can't remember the last bit, and they're leaving, and then there's lots of people die, and all the horses die because it's winter and it's terrible, and then they surrender, and then the old half-blind general pops up again.
Yes.
To accept their surrender, and was like, yes, thanks everyone for helping out with defending Russia.
Yeah. Does anyone else who's important die?
The prince dies.
Yes, Prince Andrei dies, having got wounded in the last bit.
Yep. I feel like somebody else dies.
Yeah, a couple more people die, so...
Pierre's wife dies off screen.
She does, yep.
What's the duelist's mate? Kinderloff. Kinder Surprise.
Kinder Surprise. Kuragin. He actually died... He actually died at the end of the last bit. He had.
I thought he died at some point. But
Prince Andrei sees him getting his leg chopped off.
Okay.
When he himself is like on a stretcher kind of thing. But also the peasant with a dog that Pierre befriends very briefly. He dies. He gets shot by the French because he can't keep up. And then also Natasha's youngest brother.
He dies because he joins the army.
He does join the
He
army.
looks like he's about 12.
Yes, against his parents' protests. And
Then he's on a horse waving a sword around, and one of the other officers is like, wait for the infantry to get here. And he's like, sod that.
yeah,
I'll just gallop right into the French, which doesn't work out great.
Yeah. It turns out cavalry charging into like defended gun positions, not a good idea.
No, with no support, because you couldn't be bothered to wait around.
No, yeah, his death is kind of like honkingly foreshadowed. It's like, oh, you were such a goner, mate. But I mean, it's very sad when he dies. But
yeah, it's like it's quite an impactful scene, and yet at the same time, it's sort of mixed feelings because you're like, you are being a bit dumb.
Everyone told you to be careful. It's like, no,
it's like you didn't have to do this. You're not some poor guy that's been conscripted.
No. And then who else? I think that's it from the
main
characters. Lot. Yeah.
So we haven't got to the very end.
No.
Where Pierre returns.
Yes,
after the French have left.
Yeah. Also, we missed out a thing. Like, he briefly wants to murder Napoleon.
Oh yeah, I thought that was just an underlying plot point.
Yeah. I thought they were going to do more with that because in other versions they spend more time on it. But yeah, he briefly mentions he's going to murder.
Oh, that's
Napoleon.
right. When he speaks to some French officer invades his house, and then they end up having dinner or whatever, and the French officer's like, "Oh yeah, Napoleon's showing up tomorrow."
Yeah,
and Pierre's like, "Napoleon's coming here."
Yeah, and then he kind of thinks to himself, "I am going to kill him,"
and then enacts this plan the next day by walking up to a French guard and being like, "Yeah, can I come in?" It's like, no.
All right then,
fine.
Yeah.
Then that's the end of that subplot.
Yeah, in other versions, there's much that's dwelt on much more, and there's this whole business where Pierre, through this really, really tortured logic and some numerology, figures out that if you calculate the values in, Napoleon Bonaparte, it somehow comes to 666, the number of the beast.
Right.
And then he, makes his own name also add up to that, and that means that he's going to, save Russia by killing the Antichrist, Napoleon.
We can all come up with stupid justifications for our bad ideas in life, so...
Yeah, I wonder whether they just went, this is a long movie anyway, so we'll just ditch that really ridiculous thing.
That's true. So he finally comes back to Natasha, who of course now is single, and Pierre is also now single.
Yes.
Because everybody they love is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just have a flashback.
Yes, to when she was, 13.
Yeah, it's a little bit creepy.
Yeah. And then we return to the voiceover that we had at the very beginning of the film.
Yes.
Which was about how, if all the, evil or ill-willed people in the world unite to do bad things, then the good people have to unite to oppose them, and that basically it finishes out as well. It's a very similar shot. It's this kind of either balloon or plane shot that's just kind of rising up.
So the message of this 7-hour film is join the union. I don't know.
I mean, that sounds not wholly out of what a film made in the Soviet Union would be. Although, yeah, obviously, labor unions didn't work quite how. No.
So we didn't get... Because it almost went a little bit magical realist for a moment. Not quite. When Natasha's younger brother is having a dream the night before he goes into battle.
Yeah.
And then I thought his horse was talking to him, but it turns out it was a guy that was standing behind him and not the horse. That was my own fault.
It's a long film. It's hard
I just thought it was gradually going to turn into Inglourious Bastards, and he was actually going to kill Napoleon.
Yeah.
It's an alt history.
Yeah. Yes. Thankfully, Quentin Tarantino did not direct this, and therefore...
Surely that's his next project.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past him with his levels of hubris. Although, speaking of renowned directors, brilliant segue, but Peter Jackson must have seen this, because it feels like some of the battle sequences, particularly in Return of the King, seem like they're very much
a
like
lot of the
drawing.
Rohan stuff, and
Yeah.
definitely.
So we've kind of summed up the end of the plot.
Mm-hmm.
We've made it to the end of this monster film. I think the version we've watched isn't the longest version out there. This one was about 400 minutes, and it turns out there's like a 420 something minute one out there. So yeah, I feel like I feel sad because it's like we haven't seen the fullest version. On the other hand, that was still,
That was definitely, if we're counting all those 4 parts as one film, that was definitely the longest one I've ever seen.
Yeah, I want to say there's a Bela Tarr film, I think it's Satan Tango, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's like, Hungarian film that's from like the mid-90s that's similarly gigantically long. But yeah, this is the longest thing I've ever seen. And yeah, it's pretty freaking exhausting, but I'm still really glad I saw it.
Yeah, I'm glad I saw it.
I get the impression that you found it a bit of a struggle in terms of like following the plot and characters.
Yeah, if I'd been watching this by myself, I would have really struggled. Like, it was only mainly because you and your partner were here and knew more of the...
Frequent guest, Carrie, yeah.
Like, knew more of the basic plot. Because I think it does a pretty bad job of... explaining a lot of things.
Yeah, which it feels really bad because I feel like I don't want to mark it down because it's such an epic, impressive film. But yeah, you're totally right. There are shortcomings in terms of like...
Which I feel somehow is less excusable than a 7-hour film. I know that there's still a lot of things in it.
Yeah,
but,
you think you'd get around to like explaining who everyone is. Yeah, it's kind of like, on the one hand, you don't want to necessarily like spell things out, but it is...
No, I'm not suggesting that everyone needed an introductory monologue, but... I mean, part of that is probably subtitles, and part of that is just... Like, there's a degree of assumed cultural understanding, perhaps.
Yeah.
Not that I'm suggesting that every Russian person knows every detail of War and Peace, but...
Yeah, there's the...
But yeah, when you... Depending on your target audience, there's a certain level of perhaps...
base knowledge that you wouldn't necessarily...
It's like by cultural osmosis, I guess.
Yeah, there's loads of things that you don't necessarily have to have actually seen, but you'd kind of have the gist of just because people talk about it. But so I would say this is definitely not the most accessible to a Western audience version of this story by a long shot. On the other hand, whilst there's good stuff in the Hollywood version from like the decade before this one was made, this, like the pacing of this, I mean, it's at least twice as long, so you'd hope so, but the pacing of that is so much worse than this. It's so much like trying to cram too much into too small a container. So I like the fact that this gave the characters a bit more like room to breathe.
Yeah.
And it's also like there's a certain amount of, because I wasn't familiar with the cast with this, you don't have the like, oh yeah, that's so and so, that's so and so, that's so and so taking you out of the story. It's much more like, the actors are the characters in a way. I did recognise, or I did know Sergei Bondarchuk, the director who plays Pierre as well, from something else. So I was kind of like used to seeing him, but yeah, the other people, it's just like, oh yeah, well, I don't know them from anywhere else. So it kind of makes the sort of buy-in easier. Highlights? Any, like, it's almost difficult to choose.
Just the visuals really are amazing. And it's hard to pick out like an individual bit that is particularly great, because it maintains such like a high quality of visual impact throughout its whole runtime, really.
Yeah. And even when there's matte paintings that are matte paintings, they still look really nice. It's kind of like, okay, I know that this is a special effect, but it's...
Only really a couple of scenes where it was that noticeable. I mean, I don't know whether those were the only scenes with matte paintings, or whether it's just that the other ones weren't really obvious. It's mostly those Moscow scenes from outside Moscow when it's burning and when people are leaving. Where it's very obviously a matte painting. But...
Yeah, you mentioned in a previous bit, like, the kineticness of the...
Yeah, there's so many shots that just seem, well, that are beautifully framed and lit, and even, like, sort of special effect shots that still seem impressive in a way that, I don't know, sometimes I watch old films and you go, oh, well, that must have been really impressive for the time.
Yeah.
But now it's just like,
Yeah.
But there's a lot of shots in this that still seemed really, cool is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? Like,
just like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of feel like a film like this will probably, like, never be made again, just because it's like the expense of doing all the stuff in camera with gazillions of extras. It's just like, well, why?
Yeah.
Because we can just do it on a computer.
Definitely those classes of movies where there's just, too many extras and too many sets burnt down and all that kind of stuff that would be very difficult just for the cost when you can just do it in post.
And this it sounds like it almost had like an unlimited budget. I mean, I don't know how much it like would have actually worked out as in terms of like contemporary US dollar value, but it must have been something insane. Yeah. But it's so cool. It's just visually one of the most like striking films that I've seen. And I mean, I like the performances. I mean, Carrie made a joke about getting a bit, because she joined us for bits and pieces of the film. She said she got a bit fed up with emo Natasha. But yeah, I think that's partly the character. Yeah, actually, as someone new to the story, did you have characters that you liked or identified with, or
I don't. Like, I guess Pierre. I like Pierre, even though he's a bit of an idiot.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah.
So we talked a bit when he's in the. Is it the third part? The third part where it's the big battle.
He's wandering through
he's just
Borodino,
dressed inappropriately.
Yeah,
not really helping.
Yeah,
or doing anything.
Somehow not getting mowed down, despite sticking out like a sore thumb.
So yeah, I think he's probably my favourite character, but
and there's still issues with him. Like,
oh yeah,
like
definitely. I'm not because he's particularly heroic or particularly a great guy, but
you get more of his like internal life, and he seems to, even like when he loses his temper, he seems to kind of like think better of it later.
Yeah, he's pretty like relatable in someone that is like pretty flawed and loses it a bit and doesn't really know what's going on. But hopefully is not a terrible person.
Yeah. This is super flippant, but I did say that Natasha was kind of like the like proto manic pixie dream girl in a way.
I think she definitely starts that way. I think it doesn't necessarily end that way. But yeah, in the early bits. But I think that
she kind of reminds me...
It's a bit more excusable because she's a teenager.
Yes, yeah. But when she's kind of like dancing around the place, she kind of reminds me of Kate Bush in the Wuthering Heights
She's dancing around the place and like everyone is in love with her.
Yeah.
And she's even though there doesn't seem to be much real connection between anybody.
No. And you do get very frustrated with her, like, falling for Kuragin, who basically just goes, "Oh yeah, you're so gorgeous, I love you," even though he's just met her, and she's just like, "Oh, okay."
I'm the happiest I'll ever be. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And that, having spent the last, goodness knows how many minutes of screen time kind of like mooning over Andre and how lovely he is, and then he goes away. I mean, you do get, like, for someone who's in their teenage years to have to wait for a year for something is super tough.
Yeah,
it's hard as an adult to wait for something that long, but
yeah, years definitely feel longer when you're a teenager.
Yeah, because it's a larger proportion of your whole life. But yeah, it's but you are kind of like, oh, for goodness sake. and then Pierre like declaring, like, awkwardly saying, like, oh yeah, if you were single and I was someone else, I would totally ask to marry you.
Yeah, that happening at the end of the film was, like, I thought, a weird payoff. But there you go.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice that they, in some ways, that they get together because they probably are better suited to each other than she and Andre were. But him, like, declaring his love at this totally inappropriate time earlier on in the film,
it's a little weird.
It's kind of awkward, but I think often in other versions it's like portrayed. I mean, and in this too, it's portrayed as like, oh, he's such a kind guy because she's like he's showing her how much he like values her, but it's just it's still kind of weird and awkward for me anyway. But what else can we talk about?
I don't know. We do recommendations and things if you want.
Yeah. So, would you recommend this? I mean, it's a big time commitment.
I think last time we talked, we watched something that was not great, but it was short. What was it? I can't remember.
Oh, it was A Russian Youth. Editor's note. Spoiler alert for what's coming up later this season, I guess.
Oh, yes, we watched A Russian Youth, which was interesting rather than being great, but short, so it was easy to say, like, look,
yes,
it's interesting enough you should pick it up.
Yeah.
It's difficult to apply that to a film that is 7 hours long.
Yes, and also requires probably a little bit of prior homework if you're unfamiliar with the story.
In that sense, it's kind of difficult to recommend. I would like to see it again, but I quite like to see the restored version that is unavailable in the UK on the biggest screen I could find with the subtitles off.
Really?
Yeah, because I didn't really understand what was going on anyway. And it's such like a visual thing. And having kind of seen it and got a very rough idea of what's going on, I just like to be able to watch it and kind of zone out and just see it
just
in
for
the
visuals.
best quality that's... Because we're watching a DVD transfer, which was... I don't know, it seems like it was done in the fairly early days of DVD.
Yeah.
And it last year or a couple of years ago, there's apparently a new transfer?
Yes, yeah. The Janus films did, yeah. Yes, it was actually like seeing the trailer for that was kind of like, I knew about this version anyway, but that was just kind of like, oh my goodness, I have to see this.
Because this still looks great, and I can only imagine, but it's a bit flickery, and some of the colours are a little bit...
Yeah,
seem a little
faded
or
yeah.
But yeah, like I would love to see it on a massive TV on Blu-ray or whatever, or if you could ever persuade some cinema to play it. But, which would be amazing.
Luck outside of a major city, and we'll have to wait for pandemic.
How many tickets are you going to sell to a film this long?
I mean, they did show the restored version in New York, but that's New York.
Yeah,
you know, you've got a much bigger catchment there. But yes, that would be.
But I'd settle for a big TV and something. But
yeah, I mean,
on a dark winter's night day. On a dark winter's day.
Yeah. I mean, we were fortunate in that it was kind of a rotten weather day when we were recording this, so we didn't feel like we were missing out too much, but it is basically like a whole day commitment. I'd be interested to see this without subtitles as well, just because like my Russian is a combination of like my Russian is, most of the way there, and I also know what's happening, so I'm not like, oh, who are you? Like I'm not listening to the dialogue to figure out all of those details. I can concentrate a bit more on the nuances. I'd like to see it that way as well, because like just because Russian like sentence construction and word order, reading the subtitles is kind of hard because you just get to you just get to different parts of the sentences before so it's a little bit odd, and often it's just like slightly quicker, so you're kind of like catching up to one or the other. And this had the weird business of like the French and then maybe like a Russian like overdub coming afterwards, that whole issue. So yeah, I'd be interested to see it also with that issue cleared up a bit. But yeah, goodness knows whether the newer version has that thing addressed. But yeah, I would, a hearty but heavily caveated recommendation from me. Just like visually, it's incredibly epic.
It really is.
So yeah, I would definitely recommend checking it out for that. But yeah, maybe pace yourself a bit more than we did, because I mean it is presented as like 4 films like, with credits at the beginning. So I guess the way it was initially intended to be consumed was like over a bit more, spread out period of time. Cool. Right, so before we wrap this up, thank you so much, Lynn.
You're
for
welcome. I enjoyed
joining me once again, and multiple episodes at this point, and can't quite believe we've got to 50, but
doing all right.
yeah. So before we disappear, is there anything you would like to point people towards?
Seeing film recommendations. Not nearly as epic because it's only 3 hours and something long.
Everything kind of pales in comparison, doesn't it, almost?
But that's the longest film I think I've seen recently that was great, which, if you can catch it somewhere, the Chinese film So Long My Son.
Oh, yes.
Which came out last year, I think.
Okay.
It's on Mubi at the moment, although by the time this episode comes out, it may
Who
not be.
knows?
But I'm sure it will be available somewhere.
Okay.
It is much more about a family and their relationships, although it covers actually a similar time period. Not in terms of when it's set, but the number of years in which the film goes across is actually pretty similar to War and Peace. I've seen much more personal level than War and Peace, but really, really amazing film.
Awesome.
Beautifully shot and really well told, and
cool. I would like to recommend that people check out the cast recording for Natasha and Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, which is a Broadway musical of, I guess it's latter, like chunky third of War and Peace, told through the medium of song, which sounds like possibly a hard sell for some people, but I really, really like it. It does a much clearer job of explaining the characters, and it's very fun and very dramatic and lots of different musical styles. So if that's at all of interest, I'd highly recommend that. And it's quite a bit shorter. So that's definitely worth checking out. Any personal plugs?
Not really. If you have any interest in the music of REM, check out Gentlemen Don't Get Caught.
Cool.
Probably available by the time this podcast goes out.
We'll see.
Definitely available by the time this podcast goes out, if I stop getting distracted by drawing cover art and finish editing things instead.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so, das Vidania, folks.
Das Vidania.
So that's it for this episode, but before I go, I'd like to thank Sasha Ilukovic and the Highly Skilled Migrants for the use of their song Cold in our intro. You can find that song and the rest of their back catalogue on Bandcamp and Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting us by leaving a rating at Apple Podcasts or at podchaser.com. That second one, Podchaser, even lets you rate individual episodes, so if this episode particularly stood out to you, you can let other listeners know that you enjoyed it. Recommending the show on social media is hugely helpful as well. If you can spare a moment or two to do that, it would really make my day. Thank you very much. Speaking of social media, please find us and say hi on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. You can also drop us a line at roosefilsunite@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, take care of yourselves, and bye for now. Okay, so a quick message before I go. If you're enjoying the Roosevelt Unite movie podcast, there are a couple of ways you can help to cover the cost of running the show, if that's something you're able to do. The first option is donating roughly the price of a cup of coffee on our Ko-Fi page. The address for that is www.ko-fi.com/Roosevelt The second option is by buying yourself a book from our bookshop.org affiliate site. I've pulled together a selection of Russia-related books that I thought looked interesting, and I've divided it up into sections to make it easier to find your way around. One of those sections is Classics of Russian Literature, which, as you'd expect, includes Lev Tolstoy's War and Peace. With more lockdowns likely this year, maybe this is finally the time to read it if you haven't already. There are plenty of shorter books on there too, of course. There's also Bondarchuk's War and Peace, literary classic to Soviet cinematic epic by Professor Denise J. Youngblood. Having finally seen the film, I'm very keen to get my hands on a copy. Whatever book you decide to pick up, 10% of the sale will go towards keeping the podcast running, and a further 10% will go to independent bookshops around the UK. To visit the bookshop, please use the affiliate links in the show notes to this episode. Alternatively, you can find them in the bio sections of our various social media pages. At the time of recording, our bookshop page is only available to listeners in the UK, but I'll let you know if that changes. That's all from me. Take care and stay safe.